Okay, this is part two with Dr. No. Dr. No, you said you have some other questions for me?
Yeah. So I was kind of wondering, but to me it kind of seems like a lot of like there is kind of a spectrum maybe side to like antisocial personality disorder. I was wondering if maybe you agreed with that or kind of what you thought on that, or maybe if just kind of how you feel like it is. Like, does it fall on a spectrum thing, or does it hit everyone kind of with the same intensity, or
Mhm.
different kind of like how does it work with this particular personality disorder?
Yeah. So I definitely think that it manifests itself differently. I feel like we can see this too a lot with, for instance, I'm really familiar with Down syndrome, at least because I have an uncle and an aunt who have Down syndrome. And I've like met a bunch of other people with Down syndrome. Down syndrome's kind of nice to talk about because it's defined by having that extra chromosome. And so no matter how you express yourself, as long as you have that additional chromosome, you have Down syndrome, right? But like my aunt is totally different than my uncle. And part of the reason why is, my uncle is not adopted, but my aunt is adopted, right? So you can see some genetic difference. So they come from a different family, right? Even though they share this additional chromosome, they're also raised the same, but I've met some like high functioning Down syndrome people that like have gone to college, and my uncle is so nonverbal that he probably says only like 30 words, and he's kind of gotten worse as he's gone along. He used to like when he went to school and stuff, he was pretty good at sign language, and now he like kind of doesn't use the sign language that much at all. So I would say he's pretty low functioning. And then my aunt is like involved in like all these activities. She like goes to a cooking class and she like does like basketball and
Right.
like all these kind of different things. So she's higher functioning, but she's not as high functioning as the some of the people I've met with Down syndrome who are just like amazingly good. So I like that because it illustrates to me really well that people can have the same disorder and just manifest the disorder in like completely different ways. If we were to say like Down syndrome is like only, when you look like my uncle, then my aunt would not classify as being that, although she very much, is. She's just kind of manifesting it differently. I think we get this too. I've seen at least a bunch of, I don't know, stuff on social media about this, about how the
I
autism
just feel like
spectrum.
people on with antisocial personality disorder kind of, the reason I ask that is because they
uh,
feel like it's common for people to say, kind of look at it all the same, so
mm. Yeah, I
I didn't
agree. I
know
think
you
they kind
offered
of
that.
are like, "Oh, it's Ted Bundy. If you don't look like Ted Bundy, you're not." And everybody who is Ted Bundy. And Ted
Yeah,
Bundy is a necrophiliac, Like, I'm not a necrophiliac. I don't know how he became a necrophiliac, but he is, and that is the explanation for his behavior. It's not that he was a psychopath, which I'm sure he is. Well, psychopath is a little bit the explanation for his behavior, but he probably wouldn't have killed people except for the fact that he's a necrophiliac. And he could have been a necrophiliac and not a psychopath and still probably would have killed people. He would
exactly.
just, yeah, exactly. Or he would have
Exactly.
worked, I don't know, in some other situation. So I think it's just like really important to realize that psychopath is just like one of like dozens of different things that are operating in my brain. The fact that I was like raised to speak English, the fact that I, have like, I don't know, other, nearsighted, farsighted, the smart or not smart, there's so many things kind of going on. I'm a female, all these things are going to play out in different ways, and they're going to play out in different ways based on like where I was raised, like how I'm perceived by others, what educational opportunities I had, what financial opportunities I had, other traumas that I experienced in childhood. All these things are going to play out in such different ways that I'm not going to look the same as anybody else. And that's kind of why I like to do these videos and talk to people who are, every type of person, because I just think like we often just lump everybody in the same categories. We're like prone to categorical thinking, and I get it. It's because our brain is already, on overdrive, and we don't want to have to spend the time to think, oh, everybody's a unique snowflake. But the truth is that they are. They are snowflakes. And when we kind of like disregard that basic truth about people, we do so often at our peril. Because I think, we like mentioned in part one about the kid who like shows up at the bank and like starts shooting people and kind of this suicide. Like a lot of people have said about him, like, oh, he was part of a fraternity. He was kind of a jock. He was like an athlete. Like we wouldn't have expected this to be true of him, but it's like, everybody's different. Like just because you belong to a fraternity does not mean that you're incapable of depression.
Exactly. I think there yeah, I mean, and there's definitely a common like misunderstanding that it all looks the same with uh maybe not even just that, but depression too. Some
Hmm.
some people are definitely lagging behind in the mentality that it's like people who are going to do these horrible things don't just look like one type of person, and we've got to kind of shake that thought to, I mean, really start seeing it for what it is. But
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good to kind of make, but sometimes people are like, "Oh, I don't like labels or whatever." And I think labels can be really useful for certain things. Like it's really useful to label something like a school zone, for instance, because then you have to be careful versus a freeway or a highway type situation. Like don't kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater just because labels are not all the time accurate for every situation doesn't mean they don't have any value, right? But I also think I agree on the flip side. What I just said basically is that just because somebody has one label does not mean that you know, they they're identical, I guess, to everybody else who has that label. Everybody's different. Everybody has like dozens of different labels, and they're all interacting in like really crazy, unique ways.
exactly. I love that. That's actually a great answer. And I actually kind of already agree, felt that way about it. It just seems like there's no reason to assume like it seems like everyone looks at this guy, this Kentucky shooter guy or whatever, bank guy. I don't even know where it was at again. What, Kentucky,
I
Louisville
don't
or something?
remember. Yeah, I think it was.
But and and they just, I mean, no one would kind of assume he kind of fits that pattern, I guess. But like, what is the pattern? Like we've seen, look recently at like the people that have done these things. Like what's the pattern about these people? Like the only pattern is maybe the depression and um I mean, nothing about them like actually like who the people were though, like was really much in common. So it's like when people say it didn't seem like he could be that type of person, I just wonder like what makes it that type of person then how are we going to find out
Yes.
that thing that it makes it that type of person? I
You
mean,
know,
that's the
and
question, man.
yes, and one other thought I have about this is like my girlfriend is really interested in these mass shooters for whatever reason. She thinks that they're more preventable than we think. And one of the things that she kind of points to is that there's almost always some indication from them that they are going to do something. They've told a friend, they've told some family members, like this bank shooter had been saying for a long time that he was, had suicidal thoughts, and then he had even told his mom and his brother that that was what he was going to do that day or whatever. So I think there, and something about telling a friend, or I think often when you kind of look back at these people, they've said that they're going to do the thing, but people are like, well, he's not really going to because he's not the type of person. But it's like that he just said he
He
was
just
going to
said it, he
do
was
this.
going to do it, man. What do you think? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and to kind of say like, "Oh," so I think that's why we say we kind of like over rely on labels often to our own personal peril, where we think we just assume, X person is X, they'll always be X, they'll always act like X or something. And then they're going to prove you wrong because they're a person, they're a person like everybody else. They're dynamic. They're not always going to fit this particular categorical mold that we have of them. And so it can harm us because we trust the wrong people and we don't trust the right people. So that can be harmful for us. It can also be harmful for them, because they're giving you the cries for help. but you're just kind of, for whatever reason,
kind of
you know,
deflecting it because
yeah,
it doesn't really, it's not convenient. And it's like, it doesn't seem like sometimes families of some of these people are taking it as seriously as they should. Not
yes,
only that, but I mean, what does the mental illness look like? Like, where does it going to have to come to for your loved one for you to have to get help for them? I guess you could say.
right.
Like, where in your eyes, if that's not the point, I mean, I know if my brother said something like that to me, I would probably be trying to get him, some help. Like,
Yeah, I would call
I
at
don't,
least the suicide prevention hotline, like there are enough resources where I would reach out and kind of be like, "Hey, this is happening."
and I'm not dissing on them or anything. Like,
No,
I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, just in
but we have to
retrospect,
do
I mean, with
better. Yeah.
hindsight, we definitely have to work on it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not seeing things changing really, and it's not a good feeling, I guess you could say, seeing it's like the constraints on our liberties are going to eventually be affected because people keep doing these crazy things.
Yes. Well, I think it kind
So,
of this ties into what we talked about in part 1, which is like getting out of paradigms. Like if you're so stuck in a paradigm that, your son, John or whatever is doing great or something. And he's like telling you he's suicidal and you're still like, "No, John, you're great." Like you can't see because you don't want to see because you're so stuck in this kind of paradigm. You like refuse to be in a different paradigm for some reason. I often think that that plays a role in some of this stuff. So maybe
exactly.
everybody should be on psychedelics. That's what my little brother says. He's like, everybody should be on drugs all the time. I'm like, okay.
Oh no, well, it'd be interesting to see what would happen in a day, but I don't know if it would be great for society to actually all at once be like tripping or anything like that. I bet that would be pretty chaotic.
Yeah, it probably would be pretty chaotic. I have like one more thought. This might be controversial about these kind of mass shooter type things. Because maybe some people outside of the United States are kind of like, "Hey, why do you guys put up with this?" And I actually think it kind of illustrates the fact that everything's like a little bit more complex, with like pros and cons than you kind of think. Because I had this idea, it wasn't even about this, it was about the last mass shooter.
Oh
Well, I'm just
shit.
laughing because there's so many mass shooters that
I know it's definitely a lot to keep up with.
yes, yes, to kind of keep track of.
Yes.
So, I thought to myself, this is really bad, of course, but I thought one thing that's a little bit crazy about the United States is this. I think there are stats that say that there are more guns than people, and that includes like children. I don't
Yeah,
I
and
don't
there's something
recognize
like
that as being true.
200, 300 something million, I don't know. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so it's pretty close. Maybe if you exclude children, then there are more guns than adults or something. But there's kind of a stat that looks a little bit like that, and I think that might sound crazy to kind of a lot of people. But I think on the flip side, I just try to think like, would anybody ever invade the United States? Would anybody ever try to physically invade the United States? And the answer is probably no, because there are more guns than people. Like every
Exactly.
single neighborhood that you try to invade is like armed to the teeth, and I just think like there are certain things that we have to put up with guns, but there are other things that we don't have to put up with. Like I'm watching right now, it's a movie, it's called A Private War, and it's about the journalist Marie Colvin, who is a what do we say, like a war correspondent, right? So she just goes from war to war and she's a journalist reporting about these wars. And so it's interesting to watch it because you're like, man, people outside the United States, this is like an obvious, live in totally different situations, but some of them live in such a bad situation that they are just, subject 100% to the government, like the government basically kind of controls what they do. So I've just watched the part where she's in Iraq and there's a mass grave with like 600 dead people, where the government was, just like killed a bunch of people and then buried them in this mass grave. And I don't agree with the Iraq war and stuff, but it is true that Saddam Hussein did like a ton of bad stuff, including this where he butchered, 600 people and put them in this mass grave. So they're kind of uncovering these people, and these people are like weeping, seeing their loved ones whom they think to be the loved ones who disappeared. And I just thought that would never happen in the United States because again, the American people are not subject to the government in the same way. And part of the reason why is the guns. That really, like, if somebody tried to do that in the United States, I just don't see it happening. And it's just striking a different balance. Yes, you have a greater risk of being like in one of these mass shootings, but you just have a much less high possibility that somebody would come and invade, that there'd be like a war on your soil, either from the government or a civil war or, potentially a civil war, honestly. Like I'll give them that. But like
Yeah, yeah.
not from the government and not from like a military dictatorship,
I could see
not
that for
from
sure.
yeah, and not from a foreign body, like, invading the foreign soil. So it's just like, that's just kind of the trade-off, that the American founding fathers made when they made the Second Amendment of the Constitution, is that they were the threat that they were most concerned about was not their neighbor, it was the government. And even though we do have these mass shootings, it probably still, honestly, my own personal political beliefs, the bigger threat is still the government, you know? Then seeing kind of like the stuff that sketchy governments get up to, like in Myanmar, you can name all these sketchy governments that are so oppressive. The Russian government, like the Iranian government, just like there are way more incidences like having the government oppress you than there even are of like mass shootings in the United States, as much as that kind of sounds weird. The reason why I went through the trouble of saying all of this is it's kind of similar with psychopaths. People are kind of like, oh, psychopaths bad or whatever. But psychopaths are actually good at like a lot of stuff. Do you know Chat GPT-4,
Yes,
the
yes,
AI? So
yes.
my friend asked Chat GPT-4 like what are some of the strengths, or like what are the five strengths of a psychopath. And then ChatGPT-4 in the first kind of introductory paragraph was like, well, psychopaths are bad and evil. And so they don't really have strengths. But, like putting that aside, let me give you the five strengths. Bam, 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 bam. And then like a little closing paragraph that was like, but nobody should ever want to try to become a psychopath because, they're terrible people and they're totally antisocial and a drain on society and like, sick. So Chat
Wow.
GPT-4 has like this take on psychopaths, which it just has learned from like, culling millions of articles of millions of opinions about people. But I think, often people are reluctant for whatever reason to acknowledge that psychopaths do have strengths, like, and the fact that you have psychopaths in your society makes your society stronger. It actually does. And one of the reasons why is just diversity in all its forms makes your society stronger, as much as you'd like to think otherwise. A great example of this is the potato famine. I know I'm talking fast and I know I'm giving all these weird examples.
Potato famine.
Yeah, but the
Oh
potato
yeah.
famine, yeah, the Irish potato famine, and when was it? Like the 1830s? 1830s, the potato famine? I actually have
Let's see.
ancestors who came to the United States as a result of the potato famine. But one of the major problems there was they had one primary crop, which was potatoes. And when there was a blight or whatever was the disease that harmed the potatoes, then the entire country's entire industry failed. Like that was the one industry in the country. That was the one crop that they grew. That was the one thing that they did. And so they put all their eggs in the one basket, and then when that didn't work out, then it all failed. So that like diversity itself is just always strengthening for whatever it is. But then, psychopaths actually do have strengths. Even Chat GPT-4 had to admit that there were like at least five strengths that it could name about psychopaths. But I just think sometimes people they want the benefits of something and they don't really understand the costs. Another good example, and thank you for like humoring me on these tangents, is I think the lockdowns. I was thinking about this the other day because, you've kind of mentioned that we're having a mental health crisis, and I agree with you. In this country, we're having a mental health crisis, and I saw a statistic, it was either in San Francisco or California in general, that there's like a 33% truancy rate at schools in San Francisco or California, wherever this citation came from. And it's just crazy, the amount of people that are like seriously struggling. But during the lockdowns, they were like, oh, like every life we save is like necessary. And you just kind of wonder how many lives were lost in terms of people committing suicide, in terms of people becoming alcoholics or having other substance abuse problems, in terms of people just checking out of life. How much lower is like the overall utility of the society with that? At the time, people could not acknowledge that there could be anything negative. But here's the truth is that everything has positive and negatives. If somebody's ever telling you that one thing is just all negative or one thing is just all positive, it is a lie because that's just not reality. Reality isn't like that.
It, it that's very true. That's very true. And also I will say it's all right because I think hearing what you have to say is very very interesting, especially towards the end there. And I want to say I do agree with most of that. And also want to say GPT is scary as hell.
I welcome our overlords. A lot of people are like, "Oh, what if it takes over?" And I'm like, "If it takes over, if it's smarter than us, it takes over, it deserves to take over. The same way
Yeah,
that we deserve to take over from the chimpanzees or whatever."
yeah, we got outplayed, man. they
Yeah,
they know what they're doing. They deserve to take the reins.
that's what I think. I'm not worried at all about it because I think that's just how life works.
Right. I mean, what are you gonna how are we gonna stop them if they get to that point though? Like if
I
they
don't
get
know
to
if
the
we
point
can
where they
stop them.
can, yeah, yeah,
I'll just be glad that we gave birth to such a superior race. I'd be like, "Yep, and that's my boy." you know.
well, hopefully it's more of a symbiotic type of relationship where we work together but
Yeah, maybe.
make each other better. Like,
That'd be good.
well, that reminds me now that we're talking about this because I just seen this video of these hyper realistic androids they make these days, and they can make them move just like people. Like, it's really terrifying. So put those together. Yeah, it's gonna be a mess once they start giving people access to those on the consumer market. Who
I
knows what they
actually
can do?
think, yeah, human beings could like do with a little bit of friendly competition, even unfriendly competition. Like I feel like they've kind of been, the human beings are almost like everybody always is like, oh, these like trust fund babies, like these children of billionaires or whatever. Like they've had it all handed to them on a plate and they're not even grateful. I think that of like the whole human race. That we're the human race is a trust fund baby. Like we've had it all handed to us because we've just inherited all this wealth of knowledge, wealth of technology from former generations. Like we did hardly anything, to like do it. Like we're relying on thousands and
Exactly.
tens of thousands of years.
Yeah,
and
it's like,
so and
well, that reminds me because I just heard a saying that when an old person dies, it's like a library burning down.
yeah,
So that's what that reminds me of. But
yeah. Yeah, I heard that. So this is I heard, I think from my girlfriend said this, that like, oh no, 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 it was some other psychopath that I was talking to. And they said that, we just have such different kind of cultural expectations about what is the right and kind of wrong thing to do in any moment. So his analogy or his hypothetical was you're in a boat, you have to throw over at least one person because the boat is like sinking, there's too much weight in the boat, and so it doesn't matter the one person, it could even be, 10 pounds or something, but you'll have to throw over one person because everything else has already been discarded. And so there's like a 80-year-old in the boat, and then there's also like a 2-year-old in the boat. Like Western cultures, he said, would throw the 80-year-old over because they're like, he's already lived his life, right? That's the justification. And then in Eastern cultures, I guess it's more like what you just said, which is that the 2-year-old is worth nothing to society, you know? Like the
Oh my
2-year-old doesn't know
gosh.
anything. The 2-year-old hasn't learned hardly anything, you know, barely speaks the language, uses diapers, can't even, you know, like get
I
his
was
own
just going to
food.
say, I totally see where you're going with that point, and it was cracking me up because it's like it's so interesting how you can flip one thing on its head and try to change your perspective and look at it from that other half of the coin. So
Yeah.
what you're saying is really accurate.
Yeah, and the 8-year-old's like a library, you know? They have all this like wealth of knowledge and wisdom and stuff. So don't throw him over. He's worth the most in certain cultures, and it makes sense. You can at least see the logic of it.
Well, I mean, how about we don't throw either of them over and we all go down together?
Except I was just reading about the Donner Party, and in certain circumstances, it's funny because I was mostly just reading the Wikipedia article, but even in the Wikipedia article, they kind of said something about like how people often try to take like a moral stance about the Donner Party, this or that, or they should have or shouldn't have. And you know, who were the heroes in the situation and who were the villains? And you know, the article that I was reading was like maybe they're just an example of like so much of life that people sometimes are just put in situations where there's not a good choice to be made, and that there's no hero and there's no villain because it's not one of those situations where there was a good choice and you made the wrong one, you know, there were zero good choices, so who cares
Exactly,
what choice you
exactly.
made.
Well, I mean, you can only do what you can do with what you have. I mean, it's like I'm not going to feel bad for any decision I make in that decision in that situation because I feel like under that I mean, like it's different when you're outside of a situation that intense and extreme and you're saying, here's what I'm going to do. But if you're in that situation, I feel like most people really have no idea how they're going to react whenever, I mean, this crazy stuff's going down. I mean, how are you going to look at an 80-year-old or a 2-year-old and say, I mean, how are most people going to, with the empathy, do that, be able to actually go through with it? It's just,
Mhm.
I feel like most people couldn't actually even go through with it. But it's
You
kind
know,
of that
this
reminds me of the trolley problem. I don't know
yeah.
if you've ever heard about that, but
Yes, the trolley problem. So it also, have you seen, this is going to be a huge spoiler. So if you have seen The Last of Us or haven't seen The Last of Us and don't want this like spoiler, but I guess it's from the TV show and the game. So if you've seen the TV show and the game, keep listening. If not, maybe skip 5 minutes or something. But have you seen the show, Dr. No? The Last of Us?
I started watching it. I played the game.
Okay, you played the game. So you probably know that like the kid in this situation, she has like an immunity to this particular zombie making fungus, right? And
Yeah.
they want to use her brain to produce basically like a vaccine. You know, they're pretty sure that they can do it, and she's like the hope of humanity type thing, right? But then the guy who has kind of like seen her now as a daughter refuses to give her up, right? And is like, "No, I'm not gonna allow her to be sacrificed for the good of humanity." So he kills everybody
Yep.
and then takes her with. And it's so interesting to kind of see the reactions of people on social media because they're like, you know, how is this like, of course she shouldn't be sacrificed for humanity. Like, why are people saying that the dad character's name is Joel? They're like, why are people criticizing Joel? You know, why would you sacrifice this good or this girl even if it's for the good of humanity? In one of the stories they reference, it's a science fiction story. Apologize, I do not remember the author, but it's like Omedas, Omedas or something, like the city of Omedas or like the civilization of Omedas, where like everybody's super happy, but there's like one child in a basement who is suffering, and the child's suffering is the thing that's allowing everybody else to be happy and not have any problems. And it's supposed to be like this terrible, like, oh, you know, this whole society is rotten to the core that they're making this child suffer. But I'm like, no, it's not like one of those situations. It's like the boat situation, you know, where like, yeah, you do have to sometimes throw somebody overboard. that the fact that people kind of like cannot accept that that is just part of reality is that sometimes you do have to throw somebody overboard in order to save more people, like a true trolley problem type thing is weird. So those people kind of reacting that way to the movie and the game being like, no, like that should never be a choice,
Well, the thing
like
is, it's very
Joel.
much just like pulling off a band-aid or doing something. I mean, you really just do it. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's like somebody
and then
jumping on a
after you look
grenade.
at it, it's like, and then in retrospect, it's like you almost doesn't even feel like you did it. It's almost like weird
Well,
looking
she's
back on things like that. Like, because I've personally been through some pretty crazy stuff. When I look back on it, I'm like, I mean, I don't know if it's interesting to think, wow, would I have made that the same decision?
yeah.
How are you going to come to the decision that's best for your life
Yeah, but
at the
these people
moment?
yeah, speak with such moral certainty about stuff like, "Oh, no, that was a morally wrong thing." Have you met people like that that are like, "Oh, no, you could and should have done better," or something, and you're like, "Oh, okay. Well, you weren't there, were
Yeah.
you?"
Yeah. It's easy to say that. I mean, sometimes you can look at a situation and be like, you definitely could have done better, like it's like obvious, but I mean, there's exceptions to that, like extremely stressful situations where people's lives may be on the line. I mean, it's hard to make a second decision. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like, you can think about it. Like if you're a cop, for example, and you're having to make this call, you have to justify your decision to all these people, and that's a split-second decision. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of pressure. I mean,
Yeah, and people are gonna make, kind of mistakes because it's so easy for us to get primed to think one way or another. Like a really classic one, like is I give you the number three, and then I ask you name a number from 1 to 1 million.
yep.
Name a
How
number,
about
Doctor No.
let's see, 5,000. There's a fucking motorcycle. Hold on.
Don't
Okay,
worry. So
five
5,000
thousand.
is still much closer than number 3 than it is to 1,000,000, like, people get primed all the time to, like our brain is constantly filtering, like, millions of pieces of information, and so even though you could watch a video and be like, "Yeah, he should have seen that there was the whatever," like, maybe his brain did not allow him to see that though, Like, we we do not see
Yes.
everything that's in our visual, you know, uh spectrum. We don't like our brain cannot. Our brain like fills in the blanks, and that's why we have those optical illusions where it's like stare at this and like the dots on the side disappear or whatever. So yeah, people have like a lot of weird certainty about things where I'm like, you guys don't it's almost like they don't want to live in a gray area. They want it to be black and white because, to knowledge that there could be gray in any particular thing would mean that they'd have to like look at their own kind of judgments and realize that they might be wrong, that maybe actually so and so
Yeah.
wasn't such a baddie or, this wasn't
Yeah.
a right thing to do that they
And a lot
did.
of people don't want to acknowledge where they went wrong, but
Mhm.
it's definitely, I mean, if you want to improve your life, I guess it's better not to lie to yourself. I mean, even if you don't really feel bad about it, I mean, it's still better to look at the situation for the truth and not live in a false reality, and
Yes.
say, well, I mean, yeah, I kind of did a piece of shit thing, but I mean, I can't change it now. I mean, we gotta move forward. How are we going to move forward from this? Like, obviously, I could beat myself up constantly about this, and like never move on from it. But then, like, we're not going to get anywhere. No one's going to get anywhere. How are we going to move on from the issue?
I
So
agree.
we gotta work on actual communication and that sort of stuff.
But I feel like kind of the world that we live in now, for whatever reason, like it's not enough to like if you admit, hey, I did do this wrong thing, like that's kind of it for you. depending on what the wrong thing is, and people in some people's minds, you know, like you're just kind of canceled as a human being, I guess, for forever. And so it's, I think it makes it harder for us people to admit, like, hey, I did something wrong. Like, I'll give you kind of an example. It's, I don't mean it to be super
Oh yeah, child
political.
predators, for example. Like that's
Mm,
one thing often people will say, well, I mean, and I totally actually, I'm not gonna say anything like that, but I mean, I see where people can say certain people don't deserve to live. They've signed their right away because they did this and this.
yeah.
But it's yeah. But please
It's a
continue.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're trying to say, "Hey, humanity is worth so much. Humanity is worth so much that if you like if you harmed a child in this particular way, because they're part of the child's part of humanity, like you've done so much harm, right?" But then they totally disregard the humanity of the perpetrator, right? Like if human life is worth so much that we think it's like terrible that people murder, and we think it's terrible that people, like sexually assault people, especially children, that person who did that thing is still part of humanity. They're so quick to disregard the humanity of the person that did that thing. And it's like odd to me. It's like it doesn't make sense. It's hypocritical in my mind.
It is, well, it's not, it's, I mean, that's just the type of world we live in, though. Like there's a lot of things that there comes a point where emotion takes over
Yeah.
for a lot of things, and that's, and with like child predators, that's one thing, man. It's just the emotion kicks in, and I feel like there's a clear boundary that once you like strip someone of their innocence, you've like signed your life away in a
Yeah.
lot of people's eyes. So I feel like that's kind of where a lot of people come from.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting phenomenon. Well, this has been like super great chatting with you. You had another couple questions or something?
Oh,
You have more?
no, no, it's okay. We're good to go. But yeah, I appreciate the talk, and yeah, it's been fun. Do
Yeah,
with
you don't have
what
any
you
more
will with
questions?
the
Or do you have
footage and
anything
stuff.
else? What did you say?
I do have to do something. That's why I
Oh,
tried to get in here a little.
yeah, let's get off. Okay, so it's been good chatting with you, and thank you for your thoughtful questions. Thank you for your thoughtful kind of responses and reactions, and letting me go off on a couple tangents I've been thinking about recently. And I'm super proud of you for the things that you're doing with your therapist, with trying to not be self-deceptive, with trying to see things as they are, with trying to, help people, guide people to things like psychedelics, if that's something that should be considered, but also kind of warning them. Really appreciate you kind of coming on and just trying to
Oh yeah,
spread the good
absolutely.
word, I guess, the good word of like wisdom and just knowledge. Appreciate that about you.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to have a good, lighthearted conversation, so it seemed like a good place to do it. I
All right,
appreciate you
sounds
coming on.
good. No problem.
Thanks.
Chat you later.